Hello, welcome to Zigmatech Consult Limited Learning App. We are going to take you on government class, and this time we are going to look at one of the principles of modern democracy which permits for the observance of the laws of the society. You know, one thing is to have a law, another is to make sure that the provisions of these laws are put into effect in the society. Now, this will take us to the topic, the rule of law. Specifically, in this topic, we're going to look at the meaning of rule of law, what it is. Look at the principles that explain what rule of law is. We also look at the problems in application of this rule of law. Look at the importance, why we need the rule of law in a society, and the factors that must be in place for rule of law to function effectively in our society. So these are the things we're going to learn. Now, first, looking at the meaning of rule of law. Rule of law is defined as the supremacy of law over everybody, both the rulers and the ruled, and all decisions taken in a state. In other words, we are saying that rule of law is about the law being treated as supreme over everybody, treated as the highest authority over everybody in such a way that even the rulers, those who rule, the powerful people, and the ruled and the poor masses are under the law, and all of them must abide to the provisions of the rule of law. That is why in your screen you can see the Lady of Justice, which symbolizes this in the law. If you go to any law court, this is the symbol that demonstrates this rule of law. If you look at that Lady of Justice, you see that it's blindfolded or it's blind, which means that the law does not see you, and you are not respected particularly for who you are. Whenever you go to the law court, or whenever the law is being applied to you, you can see the scale of justice in her hand, which shows that all submissions and evidence must be weighed equally. And of course, you can see the sword, which signifies the administration of justice. Now, to understand better the meaning of rule of law, I must first of all tell you the history of rule of law. Rule of law was actually an ideology propounded by a British constitutional lawyer called Professor A.V. Dicey. Professor Albert Venn Dicey existed between 1835 and 1922. He actually wrote about the rule of law in his work, Introduction to the Study of Law of the Constitution, in 1885, where he talked about the rule of law and the principles of rule of law. Now, what are these principles of rule of law? 1. A.V. Dicey explained it in these 4 cardinal principles. 1. Supremacy of law. Supremacy of law means that the law is above everybody. Nobody, including the ruler, the president, the rule, the prime minister, whoever you are, nobody is above the law, and everybody is subject to the provisions of the law. The second principle of rule of law is equality before the law. Now, equality before the law signifies that the law is a respecter of nobody, and therefore the law in its application is impartial, does not respect your status, does not respect your class. Both the rulers, the ruled, the poor, and the rich must be treated as equal whenever the law is being applied. The third one is liberty of persons. Liberty of persons initiates fundamental human right, which says that the basic privileges and entitlements and liberties of the individual must be respected at all times. And the essence of having a law is to protect human rights. So the law has no meaning if it cannot protect the rights of individuals in the society. The third one is application of due process, that due process of law. That is, the right procedure must be followed in application of law. I give you an instance. Example, if you want to arrest a person, there must be arrest warrant to be provided. Also, if you want to search a house, the due process requires that you must provide, as a law enforcement agency, search warrant must be provided before you begin to search the house. And many other duties are referred to due process. You must follow the right procedure in applying the law, and that must be equally applicable to everybody in the society. Now, rule of law, look at these principles of rule of law. Everybody is under the law. Everybody, in applying the law, everybody is equal. Human rights must be respected. Due process must be followed. Is it always applicable in our society? The answer is no. Why? Let's look at the problems in the application of rule of law. That is limitations to rule of law, conditions under which the rule of law, those things we talked about, supremacy of law, equality before the law, the circumstances under which they cannot operate. Number one is what we call executive immunity. What do we mean by this? A sitting president or a serving president or governor is immune to arrest, trial, and they cannot appear to face trial in any court of law. A president, a governor, vice president, deputy governor, they are immune to arrest according to the law. So, if a president is a partner in crime with you, my dear, you go to prison, the president will not go. But that does not mean that he will go scot-free totally. But while he's serving as the president, he's immune to the law. What can happen is that the legislature can commence impeachment proceeding, remove him, then you can now try him as a layman for that offense he committed while in office. That is how it is. So you see, when the president, governor is in question, the law is no longer equal. Number two, we talk about diplomatic immunity. When we talk about the diplomats, we are referring to official representatives of states in another country. Example, we talk about the ambassadors, high commissioners, special envoys of a particular country. Now, international law provides that you cannot arrest or try or punish an ambassador for any crime he commits in a country he is serving. He is immune to those laws, the laws of that country where he is serving. The only thing you can do is that the government of that state where he serves can call for what we call persona non grata, rejection of that particular person. His country can take him and try him in his own country for that offense. So we are not saying that he will go scot-free, but in your country, if you're a partner in crime with him, you go in for it while he will go scot-free because he is immune to your laws. The third one is what we call parliamentary immunity. This immunity applies to the legislators or the parliamentarians. And what we mean by their immunity, they cannot be held liable or tried or charged to court for anything they utter, any utterance made while in the floor of the house during their session. So the law of libel, slander, and sedition does not apply to them whenever they are sitting on the floor of the house. Whatever utterance they make in the floor of the house, you can't hold it against them. Then the type of government is another limitation to the rule of law. The rule of law depends on democracy to work. It cannot work in an autocratic system like the military rule. It doesn't apply there. Another limitation to the rule of law is insanity. An insane person, that's a mad person, a mentally derailed person, cannot be tried for any offense committed, cannot be arrested for any offense committed. In fact, their own punishment is to take them to a psychiatric hospital and take care of them there. So if you see a mad person chasing you, better run, because nobody will arrest him, nobody will try him for committing an offense. So can you see you're not equal before the law with a mad person? Age is also a limitation to the rule of law. Remember, an adult and an underage person, a minor, cannot be tried the same way in the law court. We talk about juvenile court for them, that for the juveniles, if they commit the same offense, it's not the same way, it's not the same punishment. Therefore, we are not equal before the law. Another limitation to the rule of law is what we call existence of special tribunals or administrative tribunals. I must explain what tribunal is. A tribunal is a body or commission set up by government to play a judicial role, but not a judicial body. Now, the rule of law recognizes only the judiciary, that is the law court. So whenever you create an administrative tribunal or any tribunal to perform the function of the judiciary, is a limitation to the rule of law, because rule of law recognizes only the judicial body. Another limitation to rule of law is lack of press freedom. When you have lack of press freedom, what we call censorship of the press, the individuals cannot adequately express their opinions, because most of our opinions are expressed through the press, and the most information we get come through the press. Overzealous enforcement agencies. Example, SARS, the former SARS operative in Nigeria, can be a limitation to the rule of law. When we talk about overzealous, we're talking about when these security agencies subject people to undue torture. It's a limitation to the rule of law because it's an infringement on fundamental human rights. If we have dependent and a partial judiciary, a judiciary that depends on the executive or the legislature, or partial because a powerful individual, a worthy person, an influential personnel is involved, if we have that, the rule of law becomes a mockery and it cannot work. When people are ignorant of the law and their rights, maybe because of illiteracy, the rule of law will not work, because their fundamental human right, which is one of the principles of rule of law, will be denied. Poverty is another problem to the rule of law. You know, we talk about human rights. At times, you need to enforce your right by getting the service of a lawyer. Remember, the service of a lawyer requires that you pay a certain amount to the lawyer, because that's from where he earns his own living. So when a poor person is confronted with such situation, he will leave his fight to God. He cannot personally enforce it. So when poverty is in question, and of course, even in our society, a poor man is not treated same as a rich man, even when the law is applied. Declaration of state of emergency by a governor or the head of state or the government in general denies people their fundamental human right. I give you an instance. If you can recall, during the COVID period or crisis of 2020, you discover that many state governments declared lockdown, and freedom of movement of people were actually denied. So when you talk about state of emergency, we cannot talk about human rights to be enjoyed. And therefore, you see that the rule of law is limited in this circumstance. Now, let's look at the importance of rule of law. Why we need rule of law in our society. Number one, of course, because it is one of the cardinal characteristics of democracy. Rule of law in itself promotes democracy, because democracy functions better when you have rule of law in practice. Also, it allows an accused person to seek redress in the law court. Now, if you're accused, even if you're found guilty by a lower court, by the application of the principles of rule of law, you are allowed to seek redress in the law court by appealing your judgment. If you're accused, you can go to the law court for clarification. Also, it promotes equality of citizens. It makes everybody to be treated equally in the society, because we talk about equality before the law. So when the law applies equally to everybody, every citizen will be seen as equal to a very high extent. Also, The rule of law promotes the supremacy of the Constitution. Remember, the Constitution is the fundamental law by which a nation is governed, and that's the fundamental law under which every other law operates. So every law is subject to that of the Constitution. Now, the rule of law makes the Constitution to be treated as supreme, because those that govern the society will surely do that according to the provisions of the Constitution. It ensures press freedom. Rule of law promotes press freedom by ensuring human rights, which includes right to freedom of expression. It promotes transparency and accountability in government by subjecting the rulers of the nation, that is the government, to the provisions of the law. It makes the government to give account of their stewardship and be transparent, open in all its operations. It promotes and protects human rights. Human rights are better protected in a society where the rule of law operates. Also, the rule of law prevents arbitrary rule, that is dictatorship, where the leader or the ruler can come up with whatever policy he deems fit without thinking about the interest of the people. It prevents such rule because the ruler is subject to the provisions of the law and must follow the dictates of the law. Rule of law ensures that things are done according to the law. And when we have things done properly according to the law, we talk about orderliness in the society. So that's why we say that the rule of law actually ensures that there is orderliness in our society. Now, let's look at factors that must be put in place to ensure that rule of law works. So that's factors that promote the rule of law in a society. For the rule of law to work, number one, we must have an independent and impartial judiciary. When we say an independent judiciary, we're talking about a situation where the judges, the judiciary, is not under the influence or control of any other arm of government or powerful individual, so that they can dispense justice without fear or favor. So it must be there because we need judiciary to actually interpret these laws. There must be press freedom, which promotes freedom of expression. People can actually express themselves about their rights, and their rights guaranteed when we have freedom of press. Then, for rule of law to work, there must be open trial. An accused person must be tried in the court, and it must be open. It shouldn't be done in an office of a particular individual or officer. It shouldn't be done in police custody. It should be in the law court that is known. It's not even a military tribunal. It should be a law court that is accessible to everyone. That is open trial. And the day of the trial must be made known. So when we have open trial, rule of law will work. If we have separation of powers, that is division of the powers of the arms of governmental functions into the three arms of government in such a way that no one will actually encroach upon the powers of the other arms of government, of course, there will be less tendency to dictatorship or arbitrary rule. And with that, we have rule of law in operation. Also, for rule of law to work, remember we say that it is limited by the type of government. So the only government that promotes and permits rule of law to work is democratic government, and that is why we constantly preach democracy as the ideal form of government. There must be a right to appeal for rule of law to work. People must have that right to appeal any judgment until you get to Supreme Court. No court should be final until you get to Supreme Court. So you can appeal. Even any action that is taken by any arm of government, you can appeal in the court for the judiciary to interpret the propriety of that particular action of that arm of government. If we have it, rule of law works. The law must be made open for rule of law to work. It must be known to everybody. It must be accessible. And that is why most of our laws, if you go to Google and search it, you will see. You can go to the shops and buy them. So it must be open. That is why we say that ignorance is not an excuse in the law court, because the law must be made open. And everybody must have knowledge. All the avenues to get this law must be there. And finally, there must be a constitution. Remember, the constitution is the grand norm that dictates how a country must be governed. And every personnel of government, especially the legislature, the executive and judiciary, operates based on what you have in the constitution. That's the provisions of the constitution. Now that we are done, I'm going to take you to a practice in our software, that is Examguide. So let's look at what we have done. Now, this is our software. This Examguide. I'll take you to SSCE. You click on the practice for WASC, West African Senior School Certificate Examination. When you click this, you can decide to do theory or objective. For the purpose of this, we are going to look at the objective. Now, you can select any subject. This is a government class, so we are going to select government. This government. Now, you can choose your year, but I prefer to take it at random. You can choose any other year. Now, after choosing year, we can select a topic of our choice. Now, I will unselect all so that I can go for the needed topic, the topic I'm looking for. Now, I want to take us and the rule of law. We click the rule of law. No, I didn't get it well. Go back again. Rule of law. Good. Now you click OK. Having selected the topic, you click OK and get started. Click Get Started. Good. Now, look at the first question. The observance of the rule of law in a state requires. This takes us to factors that promotes the rule of law that I taught you. Now, we have a flexible constitution, option A, an independent judiciary, we have an ineffective police system, we have existence of two-party system. Now, let's look at it. We have a flexible constitution. Yes, we mentioned the constitution, but this one is saying flexible. Remember, one of the problems of flexible constitution, it can be manipulated to the whims and caprices of the leaders, because it's flexible, can be amended at any time. So it won't gonna be the correct option. Now look at this option, ineffective police system, which will lead us to overzealous security agencies that we talked about. No, it will rather limit the rule of law. If we have the existence of two-party system, which limits freedom of association, rule of law will not be guaranteed. Rather, the right answer, like we said, I taught you, is an independent judiciary is the correct option. The judiciary must be free from any form of control. Now let's go to the next. One of the limitations to the application of rule of law is we have immunity, option A. B, equality before the law, or what? C, liberty. D, impartiality. Now you see, one of the things we talked about under limitations to rule of law or problems of rule of law is immunity. We talked about presidential immunity or executive immunity. We talked about immunity of the diplomats, that diplomatic immunity. We talked about parliamentary immunity. So immunity of some people to the law is a limitation to rule of law. Equality promotes rule of law. Liberty promotes rule of law. Impartiality promotes rule of law. So all these ones are limitations to rule of law. Now we have only 2 questions. You go next. Submit. Do you really want to end the session? Yes. Wow, this is 100%. Thank you very much. Please make sure you go to our app. Get your exam guide from Google Play. You can download the app from there, or you can go to examguide.com to download the app. Please make sure you get one. We have UTME, we have WEAC in it. Thank you.